Winter 1945. A column of Soviet troops crosses into occupied Germany, expecting ruins and resistance. Instead, they find something that stops them cold. German prisoners of war returning from American camps. But these men don't look like prisoners of war. They look healthy. The Soviets stare in disbelief. These German soldiers have weight on their bones, color in their faces. Some are even smiling. It contradicts everything Moscow told them about the West. The Red Army has just endured the most brutal war in human history. 27 million Soviet citizens dead, entire cities reduced to ash, soldiers surviving on frozen potatoes and sawdust bread. They've been told the Americans are cruel imperialists, that capitalism means starvation and exploitation. But the Germans coming back from American captivity look better fed than Soviet victors. Captain Grigory Chukrai, a decorated officer who survived Stalingrad, watches a former Wehrmacht soldier walk past, carrying a care package. Chocolate, cigarettes, a letter from home. Chukrai hasn't had chocolate in 4 years. Something doesn't add up. The Germans tell stories that sound like propaganda. They describe camps where prisoners of war received 3 meals a day, where guards didn't beat them, where they played soccer and learned trades. Soviet officers think it's a trick, a coordinated lie. They've seen their own prisoners of war return from German camps, walking skeletons who die within days, men with frostbite-blackened limbs and eyes that have gone dead. Major Lev Kopelev, an intelligence officer, interrogates returning Germans. Every story matches. The details are too consistent to be fabricated. The contrast is impossible to ignore. Then the Soviets inspect the American camps themselves. They walk through rows of barracks, clean, heated, organized. They see medical facilities actually treating patients, libraries, recreation areas, German prisoners of war writing letters, attending classes, working in kitchens that smell like real food. Commissar Vladimir Gelfand stands in a camp dining hall at Bad Kreuznach, watching prisoners of war eat beef stew. Beef, stew. His own men outside are sharing tins of mystery meat that might be horse. Gelfand writes nothing in his report. Some truths are too dangerous to document. The horror isn't violence, it's the opposite. Soviet ideology depends on a simple equation. Capitalism equals suffering, communism equals liberation. But these prisoners of war have experienced American capitalism firsthand, and they look liberated. The political officers panic. They can't let Soviet soldiers internalize what they're seeing. Whispered orders go out. Minimize contact with returning German prisoners of war. Control the narrative, emphasize Nazi crimes, not American mercy. Because if the average Soviet soldier realizes the enemy treats prisoners of war better than their own government treats its heroes, the whole system cracks. Some German prisoners of war make it worse by talking. Former Luftwaffe pilot Hans Schaaf, who spent time at a camp in Mississippi, describes America like a fairy tale. Cities untouched by bombs, stores full of goods, workers with cars and radios. They gave us coffee every morning, he tells Soviet guards. Real coffee. Sergeant Mikhail Kalashnikov, yes, that Kalashnikov, the future weapons designer, is listening. He fought from the first days of Operation Barbarossa, watched his friends die in snowdrifts and minefields, believed he was saving the world from fascism. And the fascists got coffee. Kalashnikov says nothing, but something inside him shifts. The Soviet command structure moves quickly to contain the damage. Soldiers are forbidden from fraternizing with freed German prisoners of war. Political lectures intensify. Any questions about American treatment of prisoners of war are met with accusations of disloyalty. You forget what they did to Leningrad? Commissars shout. You forget the villages they burned. And of course, Soviet soldiers haven't forgotten. The Wehrmacht's atrocities are real and monstrous, but that's not what disturbs them. What disturbs them is the gap between what they were promised and what they see. Documents from Soviet archives, declassified decades later, reveal the paranoia at the highest levels. NKVD chief Lavrenti Beria receives reports flagging ideological contamination among frontline units exposed to Western zones. Officers note dangerous questions from enlisted men about living standards in America. One report describes Lieutenant Boris Slutsky, a military translator, who asked, "If capitalism is dying, why do their prisoners of war eat better than we do?" Slutsky was reassigned to Siberia within a week. For many Soviet soldiers, Germany becomes a revelation in other ways too. Even in defeat, even in ruins, German villages have infrastructure the Soviet Union never built. Plumbing, electrical wiring, paved roads. Writer Vasily Grossman, embedded with the Red Army, observes this in his notebooks. "We are liberating them, but their poorest farms have things our richest don't." He never publishes these observations during his lifetime. These diaries are hidden, burned, buried, because the truth is sedition. The German prisoners of war returning from the West become ghosts in the official narrative. Soviet newsreels show starving prisoners of war in Nazi camps. They show Red Army soldiers sharing rations with liberated civilians. They never show the well-fed Germans coming back from Ohio and Texas. That footage doesn't exist in Soviet archives, not because it wasn't filmed, but because it was destroyed on orders from Stalin himself. Some truths can't be allowed to survive. Years later, during the Cold War, Soviet defectors will cite this moment. Viktor Suvorov, a GRU intelligence officer who defected in 1978, writes, "That's when I first doubted, when I saw that our enemies were more humane than we were." The cognitive dissonance becomes unbearable for some. If America, land of supposed wage slavery and exploitation, treats prisoners of war with dignity, if Germans under capitalism look healthier than Soviets under communism, then what was the war even for? The Soviet leadership understands the danger. Stalin's regime survives on control of information, on the promise that Soviet citizens suffer now for a glorious future. But soldiers who've seen the West know the future already exists, just not in the Soviet Union. Thousands of Soviet troops in Germany try to defect. Most are caught. General Andrei Vlasov had already switched sides during the war. He and thousands of his men are captured and executed in 1946. Their crime? Wanting what German prisoners of war already had, a full stomach and freedom from fear. The irony cuts deepest for the veterans. They defeated the Nazis at unimaginable cost, saved the world from fascism's darkest hour, and their reward is returning to a country where asking questions about American prison camps can get you executed, where mentioning that enemy prisoners of war ate better than Soviet heroes is treason. Decorated war hero Alexander Solzhenitsyn discovers this firsthand. He makes a single critical comment about Stalin in a private letter. 8 years in the Gulag. By 1946, the Iron Curtain descends. Contact between Soviet and Western zones is severed. The stories stop spreading. The questions stop being asked, out loud anyway. But the seed of doubt has been planted. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, the hero who took Berlin, is demoted and exiled by Stalin. His crime? He saw too much in Germany. He asked too many questions. And over the next 4 decades, that seed grows in the dark, silent and subversive. Because once you see that the enemy treats human beings better than your own side does, you can't unsee it. The Soviet soldiers who witnessed this carried the secret for decades. Some took it to their graves. Others whispered it to their children in the final years of the USSR. Veteran Daniel Granin, who became a famous writer, tells his grandson in 1989, "We were told America was evil, but their prisoners of war came back alive and well-fed. 2 years later, the Soviet Union collapses, not from invasion, not from war, but from the slow, corrosive realization that the promise was a lie. And it started with German prisoners of war who looked too healthy to be defeated.